Even before they laid eyes on me, my girlfriend's rich parents had already decided they hated my guts. The first time I ever drove out to their estate, I ended up stopping on the shoulder of the highway to help an older woman whose vintage Bentley had broken down. Because of that, I showed up almost 70 minutes late, smelling like engine trouble and covered in grime, fully expecting to be told to get lost. But right then, the very same woman I just helped came cruising up the driveway right behind me. That phone call with my girlfriend, Claire, was supposed to be a last-minute pep talk to calm my nerves. Instead, it turned into a full-blown lesson in how to have a panic attack. I was just standing there in my tiny apartment, already breaking a sweat in the only suit I owned, listening to her voice come through the phone in a tight, worried whisper. "Okay, Jake, just stick to the script," she said. "When my dad asks you what you do for a living, you are not to say you own a garage. You tell him you're in vintage vehicle asset preservation. And if my mom says anything about your hands, you just say you've taken up furniture restoration as a hobby. Whatever you do, don't even think about saying the words motor oil or carburetor." "Claire, baby," I said, trying to lighten the mood a little. "I'm a mechanic. That's what I do. It's a part of me. I built that shop from nothing, and I'm damn proud of it." "I know you are," she whispered back, and I could tell she was genuinely torn up about it. "And I'm so proud of you. But they're just from another world. They won't get it. Please, Jake, just for me, just for one night, can you try to play the part?" I let out a long sigh. The truth is, I'd do just about anything for Claire. If that meant spending a few hours pretending to be some guy I wasn't to impress her impossibly stuffy parents, Robert and Helen Whitmore, then so be it. I'd never met them, but I'd heard all the stories about their exclusive golf clubs, their fancy charity balls, and their silent, complete dismissal of anyone who didn't belong in their little bubble of generational wealth. And me? A blue-collar guy with a permanent line of grease under his nails that no amount of scrubbing could ever really get out? I was the walking, talking definition of everything they looked down on. I spent a good 15 minutes at the sink, attacking my hands with a stiff brush until they were raw and red, trying to scrub away the evidence of my life's work. Then I climbed into my old pickup, a classic I'd restored myself until it was spotless, and started the long drive out of the city and toward their world. The farther I got, the more everything around me started to change. The gritty city streets slowly gave way to cookie-cutter suburbs, and those eventually dissolved into huge, rolling hills where people kept horses. The road got narrower, and pretty soon, I was passing by enormous gated properties, each one looking like a fortress built out of money and privilege. I glanced at my watch. I was actually on track to be a few minutes early. It was a small win, but I'd take it. And that's when I came around a long, curving bend in the road and saw it. It wasn't just any car. It was a masterpiece. A gorgeous, two-toned 1958 Bentley S1 was pulled over awkwardly on the gravel shoulder. Its big silver hood popped open. Standing next to it, looking completely stranded, was an elderly woman. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a magazine, dressed in a tweed blazer and pearls, with perfectly styled silver hair. She was just staring at the dead, smoking engine with a look of pure, upper-crust frustration. My brain kicked into overdrive. A little voice that sounded a lot like Claire started whispering in my head. "Keep driving. You absolutely cannot be late today. This isn't your problem." But then another voice, a deeper one that was actually mine, chimed in. That was a classic car, a real work of art, and it was in distress. And the woman looked like her whole day was about to go down the drain. With a groan, knowing I couldn't just leave her there, I slowed my truck and pulled up ahead of her. I took off my suit jacket and left it on the seat before getting out. "Having some trouble, ma'am?" I asked, doing my best to sound friendly and not like a threat. She looked me over, her eyes sharp and quick, noticing my dress shirt and slacks with a flicker of surprise. "It just quit on me," she said, her voice crisp and refined. There was a terrible clanking noise, and then all this smoke appeared. My driver was meant to be right behind me, but it seems he's gotten himself lost. "Do you mind if I have a look?" I offered. "I know my way around these old engines." She studied me for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. Be my guest. I ducked under that massive hood, and the familiar, wonderful smell of hot metal and old oil hit me. To me, it was like music. It took me less than a minute to spot the issue. A clogged fuel filter. It's a common problem on that model, and a simple fix if you know what you're doing. It's just a blocked filter, ma'am, I told her. I can get it cleared and have you on your way in about 30 minutes. But I trailed off, looking down at my clean shirt and hands. It's going to be a bit of a mess, isn't it, young man? She said, a small, knowing smile on her face. If you can get this magnificent old girl running again, I don't care if you have to roll around in a ditch to do it. So I got to work. I grabbed my small toolkit from the truck and got my hands dirty. I carefully disconnected the fuel line, cleared the filter, and reconnected everything securely. We chatted while I worked. She didn't ask me what I did for a living. Instead, she asked me about the car. She knew her stuff and clearly loved this vehicle, and she seemed genuinely impressed with what I knew. Once I was done, I wiped my greasy hands on a rag from my truck. Okay, ma'am, I said. Give her a try now. She climbed in, turned the key, and the big, powerful engine rumbled to life with a deep, satisfying purr. Her face lit up with a genuine, beautiful smile of pure happiness. Young man, you are a magician, she exclaimed. How can I ever repay you? Just knowing she's running right is all the payment I need, I said, feeling pretty good myself. You have a great day, ma'am. You as well, she replied, and her intelligent eyes seemed to hold mine for a second longer. Then, with one last grateful nod, she put the Bentley in gear and drove off like a queen in her freshly revived chariot. I stood there and watched that beautiful car disappear down the road, feeling that warm satisfaction of a job well done. That feeling turned to a block of ice in my stomach the moment I looked down at my hands, which were now streaked with black grease. And then I looked at my watch. I was now more than an hour and 10 minutes late. The sun was a blazing orange ball dipping below the tree-lined hills. Dinner was supposed to have started at 7. I tried to practice my apology as I drove the last few miles to the Whitmore estate. I'm so sorry, sir. There was an older woman, a real emergency, a classic car. It sounded weak, pathetic, like a lame excuse a kid would make up. These weren't the kind of people who would understand the finer points of a broken-down vintage automobile. As Claire had made perfectly clear, these were people who cared about one thing above all else: appearances. And I, with my filthy hands, stained pants, and inexcusable lateness, was about to make the single worst first impression in the history of mankind. The entrance to the property was marked by 2 huge stone pillars, but there was no gate, a quiet statement of old-money confidence. The long, winding driveway was made of perfectly white gravel that crunched under my tires as I drove through a landscape so perfectly cared for it looked fake. Finally, it opened up to reveal the house. Mansion was the only word for it. It was a massive 2.5-story brick Georgian manor with dozens of tall, sparkling windows, all lit up from the inside like a cruise ship. I parked my humble, though lovingly restored, pickup at the very end of a circular driveway already filled with expensive European sedans. I felt like I was tying up a rowboat next to a fleet of superyachts. For a solid minute, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to clean the grease from under my fingernails with a useless napkin from the glove compartment, but it only seemed to make things worse. This was it. I took a deep breath, got out of my truck, and started the long, lonely walk to the massive front door. I rang the bell, and the sound echoed deep inside the house. I waited for what felt like a lifetime. Finally, the heavy, dark wood door swung open, and there was Claire. The last time I'd seen her face was on a video call, full of nervous hope. Now it was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. "Jake," she whispered, her eyes going wide as she took in my appearance. My messy hair, my grease-covered hands, the dirt on my suit. "Oh, my God. What on earth happened to you? Are you okay? I was so worried. I kept trying to call you." "I'm so sorry, Claire," I started, my voice low and full of apology. I can explain everything. I was on my way, and I saw this older woman on the side of the road. Her car had broken down, and I just felt like I had to stop and help her. But I never got to finish. Two figures appeared in the grand hallway behind her, stepping into the warm light of the porch. It was them, Robert and Helen Whitmore. They were just as Claire had described, only more intense in person. He was tall with silver hair, wearing a perfectly fitted smoking jacket. His face a cold mask of aristocratic judgment. She was impossibly chic, her pearls shining, her expression one of bored, icy disapproval. They looked from their daughter's horrified face to me, and their expressions tightened into something beyond simple dislike. It was a look of pure, unfiltered contempt. "So," Robert Whitmore said, his voice a low, sharp drawl that cut like a piece of broken glass. "This is him, the mechanic. I am so incredibly sorry for being late, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," I stammered, my carefully prepared speech crumbling to dust in my mouth. There was a woman on the road. Her vintage car was broken down, and I just had to stop and help. Robert held up a hand, and I fell silent instantly. "We have no interest in your excuses, young man. In our circles, punctuality is not a mere suggestion. It is the bare minimum of courtesy, a requirement you have spectacularly failed to meet at our very first introduction." His wife, Helen, then stepped forward. Her eyes, as cold and hard as her diamond earrings, scanned my appearance with a look of physical revulsion. She glanced at my greasy hands, and a small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Claire told us you were a man who works with his hands," she said, her voice dripping with a sweet, poisonous condescension. "I see you've made no effort to conceal that fact. How charmingly rustic of you." I just stood there, completely lost for words. The 1-2 punch of their snobbery had knocked the wind out of me. "I believe it would be best if we reschedule this evening, Jake," Robert said, his tone that of a man firing a butler. He wasn't even looking at me anymore. His eyes were fixed on his daughter. "Perhaps for a time when your friend can present himself with a small measure of the decorum we expect in this home." He then turned his back on me, a final, complete gesture of dismissal. Defeat tasted cold and bitter in my mouth. I had failed. I had tried to play their game and had lost miserably. I gave Claire one last, heartbroken look, a silent apology for not being the kind of man her family wanted, and I turned to walk back into the darkness, my future with her suddenly feeling as cold and distant as the night sky. But before I could even take a single step off that massive porch, I heard a sound. It was a sound I knew well, the deep, beautiful and unmistakable rumble of a classic Bentley V8 engine. A pair of bright, powerful headlights swept across the perfect lawn, lighting up the four of us in a sudden, theatrical glare. I froze, my hand on the railing, my heart doing a single, hopeful, and completely confused flip. I knew that engine. I knew that car. The magnificent, two-tone silver Bentley glided to a silent stop right behind my little pickup truck. For a moment, nobody on the porch moved. Robert and Helen just stared, their faces a mix of confusion and annoyance at this unexpected interruption. Claire just watched, her earlier despair now replaced with a deep, questioning curiosity. The driver's side door of the Bentley opened with a soft click. A chauffeur in a dark suit and cap got out and, with practiced formality, moved to open the rear passenger door. A hand appeared first, elegant and pale, wearing a single enormous sapphire ring that seemed to soak up the porch light. Then, slowly and with regal grace, the car's occupant stepped out. It was her. It was the woman from the side of the road. My would-be mother-in-law was the first to speak, her voice a high-pitched squeak of pure astonishment that completely shattered her icy composure. "Mother? What on earth are you doing here? And in that old relic? I told you the driver would pick you up in the sedan." The woman, Agnes Whitmore, Claire's grandmother and the undisputed, widely feared matriarch of the entire Whitmore clan, completely ignored her daughter. Her sharp, intelligent eyes, the same pale blue eyes that had watched me so intently while I worked, scanned the scene. They took in her son-in-law's rigid, angry posture, her daughter's flustered and guilty expression, Claire's tear-streaked confusion, and finally, my own messy, grease-stained self. She started walking toward the porch, her steps surprisingly quick and filled with a sense of purpose that made the air itself seem to crackle. Robert and Helen, who just moments before had been the absolute rulers of this mansion, now looked like two sulking, scolded teenagers. Agnes Whitmore stopped at the bottom of the steps, right in front of me. Her gaze was direct and unwavering, and it held a hint of something I couldn't quite place. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering for a second on my greasy hands and the dirt on my pants. A lesser man would have crumbled under that kind of intense inspection, but her gaze didn't feel judgmental. Felt analytical, like a master carpenter examining a piece of wood. Then, a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. A smile that held a world of amusement and something else I was just starting to recognize. Respect. "Robert," she said, her voice strong and clear, cutting through the stunned silence. "Helen." Her tone made it clear there would be no backtalk. "This young man," she gestured toward me with her sparkling hand, "who you appear to be in the process of kicking off your property, just spent the better part of an hour lying on the cold, damp shoulder of a country road to fix my car after your ever-reliable driver apparently took a wrong turn into another county." Robert finally managed to find his voice, though it came out as a strained, weak croak. "Mother, we had no idea. He arrived an hour late for dinner and he's a mess." Agnes Whitmore cut him off with a dismissive wave. "A mess?" she said, her eyebrows arching with a dangerous, ironic glint. "This is not a mess, Robert. This is the mark of a man who isn't afraid of real work. A man who stops to help a stranger in need, even when it means he'll be late for a so-called important meeting." She then looked right at her daughter. "That is a measure of character, Helen, that no amount of money can ever buy, and a quality that seems to be in very short supply around this house lately." She then turned her back on her shocked, horrified children and gave me her full, undivided attention. Her smile was now genuinely warm. "You have my deepest thanks, young man," she said. "You possess a rare and valuable skill. And even rarer, you have the kindness to use it without expecting anything in return." Then she did something that I think sealed my in-law's fate. She took my arm, her grip surprisingly firm for her age, a very public display of alliance. "Come along, Jake," she said, her smile now full of genuine delight. "It seems I've arrived just in time to rescue you from what I'm sure was about to be a dreadfully dull and judgmental evening. You will be joining me for dinner." I walked up the steps of that grand mansion in a complete daze, not as a disgraced mechanic, but on the arm of the one woman who could make powerful men tremble. The interrogation I had been fearing was over before it even started. But as I glanced back at the pale, horrified faces of Robert and Helen, I had a feeling that a new, much more interesting, and for them much more terrifying trial was just getting underway. And this time, my angry in-laws were the ones on trial. I stepped through the massive doorway of the Whitmore mansion, not as someone begging for approval, not as a disgraced and late guest, but on the arm of the one woman whose word was law in this house. The air inside was cool and smelled of furniture polish, old money, and the faint, delicious scent of roasting chicken. A tall, rail-thin butler, who I later found out was named Charles, was standing in the huge marble foyer. His eyes flickered with professional horror when he saw my grease-stained hands and dirty suit, but his expression instantly smoothed over into perfect neutrality the moment he saw who I was with. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've returned," he said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. "Yes, Charles," my new protector Agnes replied, her voice bright and cheerful. "This is Mr. Jake O'Malley. Please set another place at the table to my right." The butler's eyes widened almost invisibly at that order. The seat to the right of the matriarch. It was the seat of honor, a spot I'd later learned that my own future father-in-law, Robert, had been trying to claim for years. We were followed into the house by the silent, shell-shocked remains of the welcoming party. Robert and Helen Whitmore, who just moments ago had been the supreme rulers of this place, now shuffled behind us like embarrassed kids. My girlfriend, Claire, followed them, her face a breathtaking mix of awe and a barely suppressed, joyful smile. Agnes led me into a dining room so enormous it was almost ridiculous. The table was long enough to land a small plane on and was set for at least 20 people, even though there were only 5 of us. She showed me to my seat of honor, and I sat down, feeling like a peasant who had wandered into a royal palace and been mistaken for a visiting duke. The dinner that followed was the most surreal, satisfying, and terrifying 90 minutes of my life. It wasn't just a meal. It was a performance. A quiet, brutal, and masterfully staged play with Agnes as the sole director and her own children as the humiliated, supporting actors. She completely ignored them for the entire meal. Her attention was like a laser beam focused solely on me. She didn't ask about my salary, or my family background, or what my financial prospects were. She asked me about me. "So, Jake," she began, after the butler had poured us both a glass of deep red wine. A 1958 Bentley S1. A magnificent car, but notoriously finicky. The dual fuel pumps, I hear, can be a real headache. What's the secret to keeping them balanced? And so I told her. I talked about my passion, my craft. I talked about the beautiful simplicity of a well-tuned carburetor, the lost art of machining a custom part by hand, and the unique satisfaction of bringing a beautiful, forgotten old engine roaring back to life. I wasn't talking like a greasy mechanic. I was talking like an artist, a craftsman, a man who was deeply in love with his work. And she listened. Her sharp, intelligent eyes never left my face. She asked smart, insightful questions, and her interest was completely genuine. At one point, Robert, my future father-in-law, clearly unable to stand being ignored any longer, tried to jump in. "Speaking of assets, Mother," he began, his voice a bit too loud. "The market for pre-war classics has been showing a significant downturn lately." Agnes cut him off with a cool wave of her hand without even looking at him. "Robert, please," she said. "Tonight we're discussing things of actual, tangible value, not your imaginary numbers on a computer screen. Jake is a man who builds things. A concept I fear is becoming rather unfamiliar to this family." The verbal slap was so sharp and precise that Robert actually flinched. He sank back into a sullen, resentful silence for the rest of the dinner. Later, Helen, my future mother-in-law, made a desperate attempt to get back in the game. "The chicken is just divine. Isn't it, Mother? I had the chef order it special from a farm upstate." Agnes took a delicate bite, chewed for a moment, and then looked at me. "It's quite good," she admitted. "But you know, Jake, a finely tuned engine. An engine that's been cared for and brought back from the brink by a skilled hand. That is a far more satisfying thing than any fancy dinner. Wouldn't you agree?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face as I finally understood what she was doing. "I most certainly do." And that's how it went. For the entire meal, I was the guest of honor, the valued expert. And they, in their own massive home, were just the audience, forced to sit silently and watch as the head of their family praised the very man they had so cruelly tried to cast out. Across the table, Claire just watched me. Her face filled with a love and pride so deep it made my own heart feel like it was glowing. She was seeing the man she loved not just being accepted, but being championed. As the evening was finally winding down and the butler served coffee, Agnes made her final, decisive move. She looked down the long table at her silent, humiliated children, and then at Claire and me. "It has been a very long time," she said, her voice quiet but carrying incredible weight, "since I have had a conversation of such substance and integrity at this table. It gives an old woman hope for the future of this family." She then turned to me, a new, sharp, businesslike look in her eyes. "Jake," she said, "my late husband, Claire's grandfather, was a passionate collector of classic automobiles. His collection, which has several priceless, one-of-a-kind cars, has been sitting in a climate-controlled garage on this property, untouched and slowly deteriorating for nearly 2 decades. No one in this family has the skill or the interest to look after them." She leaned forward, her expression now like a CEO making an offer. "I believe," she said, a triumphant smile on her face, "that I have just found a new project for you. We will discuss the generous terms of your new position as the official curator of the Whitmore Automobile Collection tomorrow morning. I'm not ashamed to admit that my jaw dropped. Robert and Helen just stared, their faces a pale, horrified mask of disbelief. She hadn't just given me her approval. She hadn't just welcomed me into the family. She had just handed me a job, a purpose inside their world, and the keys to a priceless piece of their legacy. The greasy mechanic they had tried to throw out had just been put in charge of the family jewels. The silence that fell over the grand dining room after Agnes Whitmore's announcement was a beautiful thing. It wasn't a tense silence. It was filled with the deafening sound of my in-laws' world being turned completely upside down. I looked across the table at my girlfriend, Claire. The look of pure, shining, triumphant love on her face was something I knew I'd treasure for the rest of my life. She wasn't just happy for me. She was vindicated. The man she loved, the man her parents had written off as a dirty, classless nobody, had just been knighted by the Queen herself. My future father-in-law, Robert, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His mouth opened and closed without a sound, like a fish out of water. My future mother-in-law, Helen, was a statue of pure, pale shock, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. They had been beaten in their own home at their own table. They had been completely and utterly outplayed. Their own judgment had been judged and found lacking. I finally managed to speak, my voice a little shaky. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. That is an unbelievably generous offer. I would be honored. Nonsense, she said with a wave of her hand, though her eyes were twinkling with delight. It's not a generous offer, Jake. It's a practical one. I'm saving a priceless piece of my late husband's history from turning to rust at the hands of people who only see it as a number on a balance sheet. You, I can tell, see the soul inside the machine. That's a skill that can't be bought. Hours later, as Claire and I were finally getting ready to leave after a long and wonderful chat with Agnes about the glories of a 1930s Hispano-Suiza engine, my in-laws made one last, desperate attempt to save face. They cornered Agnes in the grand foyer. Mother, you can't be serious, Helen hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper. You aren't actually planning to give this grease monkey access to Father's collection? It's a priceless part of our family heritage. Agnes turned, and the warm, grandmotherly woman I had been talking to all night was gone. In her place was a figure of such cold, aristocratic authority that even I took a step back. Helen, she said, her voice like ice. Let me be perfectly crystal clear. This family's heritage is not in its cars or its houses or its stock portfolios. This family's heritage is supposed to be in its character. A quality this young man has shown in spades, and a quality you and your husband, she shot a withering look at Robert, have demonstrated a shocking lack of tonight. She then turned back to me. Jake has my complete and total confidence. He is a man of skill, decency, and kindness. He is a welcome and much-needed addition to this family. You will show him the respect he has earned. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Mother, Helen whispered, her face pale, her eyes glued to the floor. Agnes then smiled at me again. Charles will give you the keys to the West Garage in the morning, Jake, she said. Have fun. The months that came after were like a quiet revolution. Our wedding was a beautiful, happy day. My in-laws were there, their smiles were tight, but they were perfectly polite. They were terrified of Agnes, and it was obvious. The day after our honeymoon, I walked into the legendary West Garage for the first time with Claire by my side. It was a car lover's paradise, a dusty, silent temple of automotive history. There were pre-war Bugattis, classic Ferraris, and ancient, magnificent American muscle cars. It was a lifetime of work, a project of pure joy. And now it was my responsibility, my purpose. I never had to pretend to be a man in vintage vehicle asset preservation again. In fact, Agnes insisted that I invite my in-laws to the garage often, to walk them through my restoration work, to explain the complex mechanics of a timing chain, to let them see me in my element, with my hands covered in the honest, noble grease of my trade. It was her own quiet, brilliant, and ongoing form of revenge on my behalf. One evening, months later, Claire and I took one of the restored cars, a beautiful 1967 Austin Healey 3000, for a drive through the countryside. The sun was setting, the air was cool, and my beautiful wife was sitting next to me with a look of pure, happy peace on her face. I thought back to that first awful night, to the dread and fear I'd felt driving to meet her parents. I had been so willing to hide who I was, to fake being someone more respectable, just to get their approval. And in the end, it was the one simple, real act of kindness, the act of a mechanic stopping to help a stranger with her car, that had won me everything. My real victory wasn't in their humiliation, but in the simple, beautiful truth of that moment. I hadn't been accepted in spite of who I was. I had been welcomed, celebrated, and ultimately, I had won because of it. I had been true to myself, and by doing that, I had found a new and much better family, grease stains and all. What do you think about the way the matriarch, Agnes, put her own family in their place? Did they deserve that lesson in karma? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about justice, please support us by hitting the like button, and be sure to subscribe to our channel to see more captivating stories about revenge and karma.